In the spring of 1945, Berlin was a city on the brink of total collapse. The once mighty capital of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich had become a shattered ruin, choked with rubble, haunted by starving civilians, and surrounded on all sides by the relentless advance of the Red Army. It was in this grim, apocalyptic backdrop that Adolf Hitler, once the most powerful man in Europe, would spend the final 24 hours of his life deep underground in a concrete bunker, cut off from the world above, accompanied by the last loyal few who still clung to the crumbling remnants of the Nazi dream. This is the story of those final 24 hours, a descent into delusion, betrayal, despair, and death that marked the end of one of history's darkest chapters. By late April 1945, the war was all but lost for Nazi Germany. Allied forces had liberated much of Western Europe and were closing in from the west, while Soviet troops had stormed into Germany from the east. Berlin, once a symbol of Hitler's ambition for a thousand-year Reich, was now a battlefield. Artillery thundered day and night, shells exploding just meters from the Reich Chancellery Garden. In the streets above, desperate Wehrmacht units and Hitler Youth boys fought futile battles against overwhelming Soviet armor. Beneath the ruins, the Führerbunker, a reinforced concrete shelter more than 8 meters underground, served as the final headquarters of Adolf Hitler. On the night of April 29, 1945, Hitler's inner circle was a tight knot of weary secretaries, loyal officers, SS guards, and close confidants who had refused to flee despite the inevitable fall of Berlin. Among them were Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda, Martin Bormann, Eva Braun, Hitler's longtime companion, and a handful of military aides. The bunker was dimly lit, stiflingly humid, filled with stale air, flickering lights, and the constant echo of distant shelling. It was here that Hitler, the man who had plunged Europe into its most devastating conflict, now sat in a cramped concrete room, refusing to accept surrender but fully aware that the end was near. In the early hours of April 29th, one of the most significant moments of Hitler's final day unfolded. After years of keeping their relationship semi-private, Hitler and Eva Braun were finally married in a brief civil ceremony inside the bunker. Eva, who had devoted her adult life to Hitler and remained at his side even as the world fell apart, was radiant in her simple black dress. Hitler, by then a pale shadow of the fiery dictator he once was, hunched and trembling, signed the marriage certificate with a shaky hand. Witnesses included Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann, who stood silently as the brief ritual unfolded in a tiny map-lined room. For Eva, it was the fulfillment of a long-held wish. For Hitler, perhaps, it was a final gesture of loyalty and normalcy amidst chaos. Soon after, Hitler dictated his last will and political testament to his long-serving secretary, Traudl Junge. His testament was divided into 2 parts, a personal will and a political statement. In the political portion, Hitler appointed Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor as Reich President and Joseph Goebbels as Reich Chancellor, though neither role would truly function in the smoldering ruin that Germany had become. He ranted about betrayal by the generals and the German people's supposed failure to live up to his expectations. In his personal will, Hitler ensured that his possessions would go to the Nazi Party and a few loyal individuals. The documents were signed shortly after 4 a.m., sealed and prepared for couriers who would risk their lives trying to carry Hitler's final words out through the Soviet encirclement. As dawn broke on April 30th, the atmosphere in the bunker was one of exhausted resignation. Hitler, who had long refused to leave Berlin or consider escape, seemed calm but increasingly disconnected from reality. He knew the Soviets were only blocks away. His guards could hear the thunder of Russian artillery hammering the Tiergarten and the Reichstag. The streets were littered with burning vehicles and dead soldiers. Communications with remaining German units were sporadic, the last radio messages desperate and futile. Hitler's once grand armies were either destroyed, surrendering, or desperately fleeing west to surrender to the Americans or British instead of facing Soviet captivity. Inside the bunker, routine continued with surreal normality. Hitler's staff maintained his schedule. Meals were prepared, files were shuffled, messages were relayed to ghost divisions that no longer existed. Aides like Heinz Ling, Hitler's devoted valet, tended to him meticulously, laying out his uniforms, brushing off his tunic, ensuring he appeared the part even as the Reich crumbled. Hitler, physically deteriorated by stress, illness, and drug use, was no longer the fiery orator who had mesmerized crowds in the 1930s. His once commanding voice was reduced to a hoarse mutter, and his hands often trembled uncontrollably, a symptom of either Parkinson's or the accumulated toll of years of amphetamine injections. By mid-morning, Hitler held what would be his final military conference. Gathered in the bunker's map room, senior officers tried to present him with the grim reality: Berlin could not be saved, the Soviets were too close, and no relief forces could break through. Hitler, in turn, repeated fantasies about non-existent counterattacks and phantom armies that would rescue the city at the last minute. Some aides stood silently, others nodded along, but all knew the truth: there would be no miracle. General Wilhelm Burgdorf and General Hans Krebs, two senior officers who stayed with Hitler to the bitter end, tried to mask their despair behind stiff salutes and quiet deference. Around noon, Hitler summoned his physician, Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger, to finalize the details of his suicide. Hitler had long declared that he would never allow himself to be captured alive. The fate of Mussolini, who had been executed and strung up by partisans in Italy days earlier, weighed heavily on his mind. He feared not just death but the spectacle of humiliation. Stumpfegger provided the cyanide capsules that Hitler and Eva Braun would use. Hitler also insisted on testing the poison on his beloved German shepherd, Blondie, to ensure its potency. SS handler Fritz Tornoff carried out the grim task in an adjacent room, an act that reportedly devastated Hitler more than the millions who had died under his regime. Eva Braun spent much of that final day trying to maintain a strange semblance of normal life. She laughed and chatted with the secretaries, shared cigarettes and cognac, and told stories about happier times at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat. She had numerous chances to flee Berlin but refused them all. For Eva, there was no future without Adolf Hitler. To her, dying at his side was the only ending she would accept. Traudl Junge, who watched Eva's calm demeanor, later recalled how surreal it seemed, a young woman smiling and reminiscing as doom thundered overhead. Outside the bunker, the situation grew more desperate by the hour. Soviet artillery was hammering the Reich Chancellery gardens, sending shockwaves through the concrete walls below. The remaining SS guards and bunker personnel knew their fate was sealed but maintained a semblance of order. Runners were dispatched to check on defensive positions that no longer existed. Messengers braved gunfire to deliver reports that offered no hope. Even now, Hitler refused any final negotiations, rejecting pleas from some generals who wanted to discuss surrender to spare civilian lives. His mind was fixed on the idea that Germany had failed him, and that the country would fall with him. By mid-afternoon, with the end imminent, Hitler gathered his inner circle for a last farewell. In the cramped, smoke-filled corridors of the Führerbunker, he shook hands with officers, secretaries, and guards, offering quiet thanks and stiff nods. Some wept openly, others stood frozen, barely able to speak. Joseph Goebbels, ever the true believer, vowed to stay until the last bullet. Magda Goebbels, who had brought her 6 young children into the bunker, was determined that they would not live in a world without National Socialism. Her plan to poison them would be carried out later that night, a chilling testament to the fanatical loyalty that still clung to Hitler's final circle. After the farewells, Hitler retreated to his private quarters with Eva Braun. Heinz Ling prepared a simple meal for them. Reportedly, Hitler's last lunch consisted of spaghetti with a light sauce, and Eva sipped brandy. The two spoke quietly, away from the eyes of their aides, a final moment of strange domestic intimacy in a tomb of concrete and steel. Outside their door, trusted guards stood at attention, aware of what was about to happen but powerless to intervene. At around 3:30 p.m., Hitler and Eva Braun withdrew behind the heavy steel door of Hitler's personal study. Witnesses say the atmosphere was tense and silent in the bunker corridor. After a few minutes, a muffled gunshot echoed through the hallway. When Heinz Ling and others cautiously entered, they found what they expected. Hitler slumped lifelessly on the sofa, a gunshot wound to his right temple, the Walther pistol still at his side. Eva Braun lay next to him, no visible wound. She had taken the cyanide capsule. The couple was dead, ending Hitler's reign in a bunker beneath the ruins of his empire. The aftermath was swift. Ling, Martin Bormann, and other loyal aides moved quickly to fulfill Hitler's final wishes. His body must not be found and displayed like Mussolini's. They wrapped the bodies in blankets, carried them up to the shell-pocked garden of the Reich Chancellery, and placed them in a shallow shell crater. Under heavy shellfire and with Soviet shells landing dangerously close, they poured petrol over the corpses and set them alight. The flames flickered in the cold April wind, half consumed by the bombed-out garden soil and relentless artillery strikes. A few loyal guards stood watch as the remains burned, a pathetic funeral pyre for a dictator who once dreamed of ruling the world. Inside the bunker, those who remained faced stark choices: surrender, suicide, or a desperate breakout attempt. Joseph Goebbels and his wife would poison their 6 children that same night before taking their own lives. Some officers shot themselves in the bunker corridors. Others slipped into civilian clothes, hoping to escape Berlin disguised as refugees. A few, like Traudl Junge, managed to flee the bunker through bombed-out streets, dodging Soviet patrols and hiding among the masses of displaced Berliners. Above ground, Soviet troops soon stormed the Reich Chancellery and the bunker complex. What they found confirmed rumors but left many questions unanswered. The charred remains were partially recovered, examined, and hidden by Soviet authorities, feeding decades of conspiracy theories about Hitler's fate. For years, the Soviets kept details secret, allowing myths of Hitler's escape to South America to flourish in the shadows of the Cold War. In the decades since, historians, witnesses, and declassified documents have pieced together what really happened in those final hours. The truth remains far less dramatic than the myths. Hitler died exactly as he had planned, by his own hand, inside a dark concrete bunker while his empire crumbled above him. His death marked the final collapse of Nazi Germany. Within days, Berlin fell to the Red Army. Within a week, Germany surrendered unconditionally, and World War II in Europe came to an end. The legacy of Hitler's last 24 hours is as grim as it is pivotal. It reminds us how power, unchecked and driven by delusion and hate, can end not in triumph but in a squalid underground room, surrounded by ruin and betrayal. It shows how absolute loyalty can bind people to destructive ideas until the bitter end, dragging innocence with them into the abyss. And it serves as a stark warning that history's darkest chapters are often closed not by heroic last stands but by desperate acts in hidden places. Today, the Führer bunker is gone, buried under a mundane parking lot in modern Berlin. There are no grand memorials, no markers glorifying its infamous occupant. Visitors might stand there, unaware of the grim events that unfolded meters beneath their feet. Berlin chose to bury that place with time, leaving only history books and fading witness accounts to remind us of what happens when power, fanaticism, and cruelty reach their inevitable conclusion. The story of Hitler's last 24 hours is more than just the end of one man. It is a final chapter in a story of war, genocide, and human tragedy on a scale that still defies comprehension. It is a testament to the countless lives lost, the cities destroyed, and the moral wounds that Europe and the world would spend generations trying to heal. In remembering those final moments, the bunker's cold walls, the flickering lights, the quiet goodbyes, and the final gunshot, we remember not just how it ended, but why it must never happen again. So, as we stand here decades later, studying the last moments of Adolf Hitler, it is not out of morbid curiosity alone. It is a reminder of what hate and blind loyalty can create and destroy. It is a reminder that no dictator, no matter how powerful, is immune to the consequences of their actions. And it is a reminder that history, however dark, must be faced, told, and learned from, so that no one ever repeats the path that led to that bunker beneath Berlin. If you found this story important, please share it, subscribe for more in-depth history documentaries, and tell us what other historical moments you'd like us to cover. Thank you for watching and for remembering history with us.